Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? I don't know why I went inside. Maybe it was the curiosity that comes with finding something strange, something that shouldn't be, in the middle of a familiar place. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was walking through the older part of the city, the area that's always quiet, the buildings crumbling, the streets lined with empty shops and abandoned storefronts. Most of the structures here were relics of a time gone by, forgotten by the city's constant growth, overtaken by new developments. I had passed by this particular building countless times. It was an old office building, the kind that used to house insurance companies or law firms decades ago. I'd never given it much thought until today. The heavy iron door was cracked open slightly, just enough to catch my attention as I walked by. The building was supposed to be abandoned, but the door was ajar. That's when I felt the pull, that inexplicable curiosity. The kind of feeling that grips you at the edge of your mind, urging you to step out of your comfort zone, to go beyond what you know. I pushed the door open. What struck me immediately was the light. Inside, the building was fully lit, fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead, casting a sterile, almost hospital-like glow across the cracked tiles and dusty floor. There were no signs of the decay I had expected, no dust or cobwebs in the corners. It was too clean, too bright for a place that had been left to rot for years. I took a step further in, my shoes clicking against the tile. The place was silent, save for the hum of the lights overhead and the faint buzz of a fan somewhere deep in the building. The air felt stale, but not musty. There was something strange about it, as if the air had been conditioned and regulated despite the abandoned state of the building. I walked down the hallway, trying to make sense of it. The place felt like a time capsule, frozen in a moment. Long past, office chairs were scattered around, papers left on desks that hadn't been touched in ages. Yet everything was eerily pristine. The chairs were aligned, the papers neat, as though the building had only just been vacated. But it didn't feel like a normal abandoned building. It felt alive. It felt as though someone had just stepped out, leaving everything in place. And yet, no one was here. As I moved further down the hall, I heard something, a soft shuffle of footsteps from a room down the corridor. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My first instinct was to turn back, to leave before I did something foolish. But then I heard it again, soft, deliberate, as if someone was moving around, unaware of my presence. I couldn't resist. I moved toward the sound. I pushed open a door on the left. It opened into a large room, perhaps a conference room or a break area. The fluorescent lights were still on, and there, sitting at one of the long wooden tables, was a person. They were hunched over, scribbling something on a piece of paper. I couldn't see their face, but they were dressed in a office suit, the fabric faded and frayed at the edges. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back, wanting to leave but unable to move. There was something unsettling about the figure. They didn't acknowledge my presence. They just sat there, writing, as if I were nothing more than a shadow in the room. I called out, my voice shaking, "Excuse me." They didn't respond. I stepped inside, the door creaking behind me, but the figure didn't react. I was too afraid to approach them, yet too captivated to leave. I felt the strange, growing urge to know more, to understand why this place felt so wrong. "Hello?" I asked again, my voice louder this time. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't look up. I took another step forward. My foot hit something on the floor, a piece of paper, and I bent down to pick it up. That's when I saw the name on the paper. It was mine. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I stared at the paper. The handwriting was mine, the pen strokes identical to the ones I used every day. The paper wasn't old, though it looked fresh, as if it had just been written. I turned it over, my mind racing, but there was nothing else on it, just my name. I backed away, my legs unsteady beneath me. The figure still hadn't moved. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the other desks. They were all filled with papers, all with my name written on them, piles of them, scattered across the desks like some strange, unspoken assignment. I ran, I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath, the cool air filling my lungs. My heart was pounding in my chest as I looked back at the building. It looked just like it had before, dark and abandoned. The door now closed tightly behind me. There was no sign of anyone. The lights had gone out. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? But I knew I hadn't. I had felt it. I had seen it. The building, the lights, the figure, and the papers, they weren't just random coincidences. There was something there, something waiting. I haven't gone back since that day. But sometimes, when the lights flicker in the hallway or when I sit down at my desk, I can feel it again, the weight of those papers. The memory of my own name written everywhere. The eerie pull of something just beyond my understanding. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the hum of fluorescent lights in the distance, and I wonder if I'll ever truly escape that building. That strange, fully lit room where everything felt wrong and yet so disturbingly familiar. It started like any other afternoon. I had just finished a long day at work and was ready to head home. I walked out of the office building, tired, my mind already drifting toward the comfort of my apartment. The parking lot was busy, cars lined up in neat rows, each one heading off to their destination, the hum of engines filling the air. I reached my car, a little tired from the day's stress, and there, sitting on the windshield, was a small folded piece of paper. At first I thought it was a parking ticket or some flyer for a local event. But when I picked it up, I noticed that it wasn't anything like that. It was a handwritten note, written in neat, elegant script. The words on it were simple, yet strange. "I know what you're hiding. Meet me at Holloway at midnight. You don't have to be afraid. I'm waiting." I stood there for a moment, staring at the note, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain in the air. My heart began to race, a prickling sensation crawling up my spine. I looked around the parking lot, expecting to see someone, anyone, but there was no one in sight. Just the usual cars, the empty spaces between them, and the fading light of the setting sun. I unfolded the note again, just to make sure I hadn't misread it. It wasn't signed, and there was nothing more than that strange message. The name Holloway echoed in my mind. It sounded like a place, but I had never heard of it before. I knew the city pretty well, or at least I thought I did. I had lived here for years, passed through countless streets and neighborhoods, but Holloway, it didn't ring any bells. No street in the city had that name. At least, none that I could recall. I stood there for a while, the note in my hand, debating what to do. I felt a strange pull, an inexplicable need to know who had left it and why. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Why would someone leave a note like that on my car? What did they mean by, "I know what you're hiding"? After a moment of hesitation, curiosity won out. I decided to drive around the city, searching for this Holloway. It was nearly midnight, and the streets were quieter now, the usual noise of the city reduced to a soft hum. I drove aimlessly at first, not entirely sure where I was headed, but the more I drove, the more I realized I didn't recognize the streets I was passing. The city seemed different now, like a place I'd never been, even though it was all familiar. I pulled out my phone and tried to search for Holloway on the map, but nothing, no results. I tried typing it in every way I could think of: Holloway, Hollow Street, Hollow Avenue. It didn't exist. There was no street by that name, not on any map, not anywhere. My anxiety started to spike. Was this some kind of joke? But it didn't feel like a prank. The note had been too real, too personal. I continued driving, feeling more lost by the minute. As the clock struck midnight, the streets grew darker, the city almost ghostly, like I had wandered into a place that didn't belong. I was about to turn back when I saw Itat, the end of a narrow alley, barely visible under the dim streetlights. There was a road sign. I slowed my car, my heart pounding in my chest. The sign read, Holloway. I couldn't believe it. There was no way. I was sure this street hadn't been here earlier. I had driven through this part of town countless times, and I was certain there was no street by this name. And yet, there it was, clear as day. Holloway. I parked the car a few yards from the sign and got out. The street was eerily quiet. The air still, and the faint scent of rain hung in the air. The road was empty, the houses on either side dark, their windows like hollow eyes staring into nothingness. I stepped forward, my footsteps echoing louder than they should in the silence. The street seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, and a cold chill began to settle in my bones. I walked further down the street, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the longer I walked, the stranger it felt. The houses didn't look like the ones I was used to seeing. They were old, run down, almost abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the doors locked tight, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. I reached the end of the street, where I saw a small, dimly lit figure standing near a gate, just outside a house. They were watching me, their silhouette barely visible in the shadows. My heart thudded in my chest, but I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to turn around and leave. The figure stepped closer, revealing a face I knew all too well. It was mine, but not quite. The person in front of me looked like me, but their features were distorted, their eyes too wide, their smile too sharp. They tilted their head, as if studying me, their face unreadable. "I've been waiting," they said, their voice almost familiar, but off in some way I couldn't explain. "You came just like I knew you would." My breath caught in my throat. My own face stared back at me, but it wasn't me. It was someone else wearing my skin. "You've always known," they continued, their voice low, "but you're finally ready to face the truth, aren't you?" I backed away slowly, my mind scrambling to understand. The world around me seemed to blur at the edges, like I wasn't supposed to be here, like this place shouldn't exist. Before I could turn and run, the figure smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach their eyes. They whispered, almost too softly to hear, but I heard it clearly. Everything you've been hiding is here. I turned and ran without thinking, my footsteps pounding against the pavement. The feeling of being pursued growing stronger with every step. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I drove back home in a daze, the streets of Holloway fading behind me, but the feeling didn't go away. I couldn't shake the thought that I had seen something I shouldn't have. That street, that place shouldn't exist, and neither should the person who had been waiting for me there. But even now, when I close my eyes, I hear their voice, and I know, deep down, that I'm not done with Holloway. It's waiting for me, just like the note said. It was a night like any other, the kind of night where everything feels normal. But there's a sense of quiet unease hovering in the air, like something is just out of reach. I had been walking for what felt like hours through the wet streets. The rain falling in a steady rhythm, soft but persistent. The world around me was blurred by the mist that clung to the pavement, and the glow of the streetlights painted everything in an eerie yellow. I don't know why, but there was something different about this walk, something I couldn't put my finger on. I told myself it was just the rain, the kind of weather that makes everything feel a little off. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. As I passed the old diner, its neon sign flickered in the rain, a constant battle between light and darkness. It had been like that for years, the buzzing of the sign mixing with the hum of the city, but tonight, something was wrong. It wasn't just flickering. No, it was more like it was struggling, a stuttered pattern that seemed to speak to me. I watched it for a moment longer, unsure why I couldn't tear my gaze away. The colors shifted, from a dull red to a sickly green, and then to blue, and then back to red again. I thought I saw something in the reflection of the glass, but when I turned to look, the reflection was empty, save for my own face staring back at me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I shrugged it off. It was nothing, just my imagination. But then, the lights flickered again, and this time, they didn't just flicker. The buzzing of the sign faded for a split second, and in that silence, I heard it. A whisper, soft, too soft to fully understand, but unmistakably there. My name. It felt as though it had been said in my ear, just behind me, like a secret being shared. Underscore, it whispered, like the sign was calling me, or worse, like it knew me. I shook my head and took a step back, the wet pavement reflecting the world above, distorted and unclear. But as I moved away, the neon flickered again, and this time it didn't just flicker. It spelled my name, slowly, as if it were deliberate. Each letter lighting up one by one. I froze. My heart stuttered in my chest, and I tried to rationalize it. It's just the rain, I told myself. The weather's messing with the circuits. But deep inside, I knew that wasn't true. I had been here hundreds of times before. That sign never flickered like this, never spelled anything. It was a malfunction, sure, but something about this felt wrong, like the sign had been waiting for me. The rain kept falling, but now it felt heavier. the sound of it pelting against the ground more pronounced, more like something was drowning beneath the noise. I glanced around, but the streets were empty, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional car driving past, its headlights cutting through the wet streets. But there was something unsettling about the silence around me, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I tried to move, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. The sign had my attention now, its flickering turning into something almost hypnotic. I couldn't look away. The lights buzzed, crackling with electricity, each pulse of light feeling like it was vibrating through me. The letters of my name flickered again, and I realized, with a shock, that they were not just letters. They were distorted, jagged, as if something had clawed them into the neon light, forcing them to burn into existence. I wanted to leave, to walk away, but my legs refused to obey. A strange pull kept me there, and that voice, that whisper kept getting louder, but not in a way I could hear with my ears. It was more like a presence, something close, yet impossibly far away. The whisper was now an invitation, a question, a demand. It called me, like the city itself had wrapped its fingers around my soul, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The rain began to pound harder, like a drumbeat in the background, louder and faster, as though the city were growing impatient. I took a step back, but as I moved, I heard a sound, just barely perceptible over the rain. It was soft at first, like something dragging across the pavement. Then, suddenly, there was a sharp snap of a twig, or was it something else? I couldn't tell. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound came again, but this time, it was closer, too close. I looked to my right, where the alley beside the diner led into darkness. The rain was heavier now, the water pooling in the cracks of the sidewalk. I was about to turn and leave when I saw it. A figure, standing just at the edge of the alley. Shrouded in the shadows, its outline almost indistinguishable from the night around it. I couldn't make out any details, just the silhouette of a person, motionless, watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and the whispering voice, the one that had been calling my name, grew louder. It wasn't just the sign now, it was the city itself. The buildings seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing longer and darker, as though they were alive, pressing in on me. The figure in the alley didn't move, but I knew, somehow, that it was waiting for me. It wanted something. I tried to take a step forward, but my legs felt like they were filled with cement. My eyes never left the figure, and yet it seemed to blur in and out of focus. One moment, it was there, sharp and clear. The next, it melted back into the darkness, leaving only the faintest trace of movement. I started to walk away, slowly at first, keeping my gaze locked on the figure in the alley. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something else. A second figure, barely visible, emerging from the mist, standing in the doorway of the diner. A third figure, then a fourth. They were everywhere now, each one flickering in and out of the shadows, their faces hidden, but their presence undeniable. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a world that was slowly unraveling around me. The rain fell harder, the sound deafening, but the whispers remained. "Come closer," they urged, their voices soft and insistent. "Come closer, and you'll understand." I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, not caring. My feet splashed through the puddles, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel their eyes on me, following me. The lights of the diner flickered again, and this time, the buzzing sound was joined by a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the very ground beneath me. I kept running, faster now, the rain stinging my face, the wet air thick with the scent of something decaying. I couldn't escape. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I tried to go, I could still hear the whispers. Then, I reached the corner, where the street opened up into a small park. I stopped, breathless, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. But when I looked around, I realized something horrifying. There was no street, no park, no buildings. There was only darkness. I was standing in the same place, the same corner, the same alley. It was all the same, the neon lights still flickering, spelling my name that I couldn't escape, that I couldn't outrun. And that's when I realized they hadn't been waiting for me. They had been waiting for someone else, someone who had come before me, and that someone had never left. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat, as the figure in the alley took a step forward. The rain kept falling, steady, eternal. But the whispers were still there, growing louder. And I knew, in that moment, that I would never be alone again. It started like any other evening, the kind of evening when the world feels like it's holding its breath, just before night takes over. I was walking through the city, aimlessly wandering, trying to shake off the weight of the day. The rain had started earlier, a light drizzle that slowly turned into something more constant, more determined. The streets were quieter now, and the faint hum of the world outside felt distant, almost muffled. I had always loved walking through this part of town. It was full of memories, the kind of place that tugged at something deep inside you. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavier, the sounds more muted, like the world had been swallowed by the mist and rain. I turned a corner, something I had done 1,000 times before, but as I did, my gaze fell on a narrow alley I had never noticed before. I knew this city like the back of my hand, every street, every crack in the pavement, every corner, but this alley was unfamiliar, almost like it had never existed. It was wedged between two buildings, so narrow that if you weren't looking closely, you could easily pass it by. I felt drawn to it. It wasn't a feeling of fear, not exactly. It was more like curiosity, like a part of me knew I had to go down there. So, I did. The alley was darker than the streets outside. The light from the street lamps barely reached it, swallowed by the walls of the old buildings. But as I walked deeper, I noticed something strange. The sound of the rain became almost muted, like the alley was cocooned in its own little world, cut off from the rest of the city. The air smelled different too. It wasn't the usual damp, wet pavement smell. It was something else, something oddly familiar. I took a few more steps, and then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. At the very end of the alley, there was a door. It was old, wooden, and covered in ivy, the kind of door you only see in movies. A door that doesn't belong in a place like this. I don't know why, but I approached it. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to change. The smell, the sounds, everything became sharper, clearer, as though the alley itself had suddenly become alive. My heart started to race. and I felt a strange chill run down my spine. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're standing on the edge of something you can't quite understand. I reached the door and hesitated. There was no sign, no indication of where it led, but I knew, deep down, that I had to open it. With trembling hands, I pushed the door. It creaked as it opened, revealing a small hallway on the other side. The floor was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with old, faded photographs. I stepped inside, and the air shifted again. It felt warm now, comforting, like the embrace of something you've longed for but never thought you'd find. My breath caught in my throat. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, its shadows dancing around me, pulling me forward. I didn't know why, but I walked down it, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet underfoot. The pictures on the walls were all blurry, the faces unrecognizable, but there was something about them that stirred something deep inside me. It was like looking at fragments of a dream, pieces of a life that didn't quite belong to me, but to someone else. And then, at the end of the hallway, I saw it. A door, slightly ajar, with light spilling out from the crack. I pushed it open and stepped inside. I froze. There, in front of me, was my childhood home. Not the one I had left behind years ago, but the one I had dreamt of. The one I had always thought of when I closed my eyes and remembered where I came from. The walls were the same pale yellow, the same old furniture in the living room. It was like stepping back in time. The air smelled of my mother's perfume, of the freshly baked cookies she used to make every Sunday. I walked further in, my feet moving of their own accord, and as I did, everything began to feel real, too real. It wasn't just a memory. It was as though I had walked into the past, into a place I thought was lost forever. I wandered through the house, room by room, each one more familiar than the last. I passed my old bedroom, the one with the blue walls and the window that overlooked the backyard. I could almost hear the sound of my younger self laughing, playing with my toys. The kitchen, the smell of dinner cooking on the stove, the soft clink of dishes being washed, it all felt too vivid, too alive. But as I walked deeper into the house, a strange feeling began to creep over me. It wasn't fear, exactly, but something unsettling, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I realized that there was no one here, not a single soul. No sign of my parents, no sign of anyone who had once lived here. It was as if I had stepped into a ghost of my past, a place frozen in time, but completely empty. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I pulled at the handle, tried to push, but it was stuck. I pounded on it, but the door didn't budge. The house, once so warm and familiar, now felt suffocating, its walls closing in around me. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the old rocking chair, was a figure. It was standing motionless, its back to me, barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence. It was watching me, waiting. I called out. But my voice seemed to get lost in the air, swallowed by the house, swallowed by the silence. I tried to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The figure turned, its movements slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. As it faced me, I saw nothing but darkness in its eyes, emptiness, like it wasn't even human. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. And then, Just as I thought I might lose my breath, everything stopped. The house, the figure, the feeling, it all vanished. I was back in the alley, standing in the rain, drenched and cold, my heart still racing. The door was gone, the alley was empty, and the city was silent again. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I dreamed it? Had I imagined it all? I glanced around, hoping to find something that would explain it, but there was nothing. No door, no alley. Just the sound of the rain, the same rain that had been falling when I first walked down the street. But in the back of my mind, I knew something had changed. Something had followed me back. Something that I couldn't explain, but something I could feel every time I closed my eyes. The city felt different now, heavier, and as I walked back toward the familiar streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left a part of myself behind in that house, in that moment. And maybe, just maybe, I was never meant to find my way back. I've always been drawn to quiet places, the kind of spots where time seems to slow down, where the hustle of the world can be temporarily forgotten. That's why I found myself at this little cafe tucked away on a side street, away from the usual noise of the city. It was small and cozy, with an old-world charm that made it feel timeless, like it belonged to a different era. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans, mixed with the subtle hint of pastries baking in the back, and the soft murmur of voices blended with the occasional clink of a spoon against a cup. I had been sitting there for about half an hour, reading a book I had picked up on a whim, when I noticed her. She was sitting at a table near the window, tucked into the corner, where the light from the street lamps outside cast a warm golden glow on her. I couldn't help but notice her posture was so still, so poised. There was something almost unnerving about the way she sat there, like she wasn't just part of the scene but somehow suspended within it. She was dressed in a simple black coat, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She was staring into her cup, not drinking, but just looking into it, as if lost in thought. I noticed her hands, delicate fingers tracing the rim of the cup in slow, deliberate motions. But it wasn't just her movements that caught my attention. It was the fact that, despite being so present in the room, she wasn't quite there. I know it sounds strange, but something about her seemed slightly off, like she was both too real and not real enough. It was as if the world around her didn't quite connect to her, or perhaps she wasn't fully connected to it. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that crept into my chest, but I couldn't help but glance over at her every now and then, and that's when I saw it. The reflection, or rather, the lack of it. At first, I thought I had just missed it. Maybe the lighting was playing tricks on my eyes. But as I looked closer, I realized that there was no reflection of her in the cafe's window. The window was reflective, catching the dim light from the street outside, and I could see the outlines of the cafe's interior mirrored in it. The tables, the chairs, the soft flicker of the hanging lights. But she wasn't there, not a hint of her. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't uncommon for reflections to be distorted by the angle of light or the way the glass was made, right? Maybe the window was just dirty, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as I continued to look at her, the unease deepened. The longer I stared, the more I realized that she wasn't just absent from the reflection. It was like she shouldn't have been there at all. I tried to focus on something else. to clear the feeling from my mind, but I couldn't. My eyes kept drifting back to her, drawn as if by some unseen force. I watched as she gently lifted the cup to her lips, taking a slow sip. Her gaze never lifted, never met anyone's eyes. There was something profoundly lonely about her, like she was stuck in a moment, frozen in place, unable to move forward or back. It took me a few more moments to realize it, but by then, it felt like the room had changed. The cafe was quieter now. The voices around me faded into the background as though they were becoming distant, lost in the space between reality and something else. The warmth from the cup in my hand seemed to dissipate, and the air around me felt colder, thicker, as though something was shifting, something unseen and untouchable. I looked back at her again, and this time, I couldn't look away. My heart was beating harder in my chest now, my pulse thudding in my ears. There was a tightness in my throat, a lump I couldn't swallow. It wasn't just her reflection that was gone, it was her presence. The longer I stared at her, the more I began to feel like she wasn't real at all, like she was some kind of ghost, haunting this place, suspended in the middle of a life that wasn't hers. I didn't know why, but I stood up then, unable to sit still any longer. I moved toward the counter, trying to make sense of the feeling that had settled inside me. But as I reached the counter, I glanced over at her again. This time, I was closer, and I could see the details more clearly. The delicate curve of her neck, the way her coat sat on her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the cup. But something was different now. The space around her was shifting, blurring, as though it didn't quite exist. The walls seemed to ripple, and the light from the window flickered like it was being pulled toward her, pulled into her. I quickly turned back to the counter, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. I could feel my hands trembling, the air too still around me. I reached for my phone, but my fingers felt numb as I dialed the number for the cafe's staff. I think there's something wrong with the woman by the window, I said, my voice trembling more than I expected. She's not in the reflection. The barista on the other end of the phone paused, then replied, "What do you mean? There's no one sitting by the window." My blood ran cold, the words hanging in the air like a warning. I turned, slowly, my heart skipping a beat as I looked toward the window. The chair was empty, the table was empty, she was gone. I scanned the cafe quickly, my breath coming faster now. I could feel the ground beneath me sway, the world shifting around me, but no one had come in or left. There had been no noise, no indication that anyone had moved. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How could she have vanished so quickly? And why hadn't anyone else noticed? The cafe seemed different now, its warmth fading into something colder, emptier. My reflection stared back at me from the window, sharp and clear, while the rest of the cafe seemed to blur at the edges, as though the whole place was fading away. And that's when I realized something. It wasn't just her reflection that had disappeared. It was her, everything about her. She wasn't meant to be there, and she never had been. I quickly left, stepping out into the rain, the cold air hitting my skin like a shock. I looked back at the cafe one last time, but the window was empty now. The reflection of the street lamps, the only thing visible. I couldn't stop shaking. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, and as I walked away, I kept hearing the faintest sound, like the softest whisper of a name, just behind me. It was hers, but it wasn't a name I could remember. And I knew, then, that I hadn't just seen her. I had felt her, and whatever she was, whatever had been sitting in that cafe, was still out there, waiting. It was just another routine evening. The city had its usual hum, a blend of distant car engines, pedestrians chatting in the streets, and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights above. I had just finished a long day at work, my mind slightly foggy from the monotony of the office. The subway station was crowded as usual, the kind of hustle and bustle that makes you feel like you're just one small part of a much larger machine. I walked toward the platform, my eyes scanning the sea of people, all of us existing in the same shared space, but still somehow alone. The familiar screech of the train's brakes sounded in the distance, followed by the low rumble of its arrival. I wasn't in a hurry, just another day, another ride home. The subway train came to a stop in front of me, its door sliding open with the usual sigh of air. I stepped on, finding a spot to stand by one of the poles, and waited for the train to pull away. The train wasn't crowded, but there were still a few other commuters scattered around the guy in the corner, hunched over his phone. The woman sitting near the window, headphones on, lost in her own world, and the tired-looking man in a suit across from me, staring at the floor with half-closed eyes. I felt the train move beneath my feet, the familiar rocking sensation that always seemed to soothe me after a long day. The further we traveled, the more I zoned out, my eyes fixed on the darkened tunnel outside the window. The sound of the train's wheels on the tracks was almost hypnotic. As the train swerved to the next stop, I noticed a strange stillness in the air. It was subtle at first, but the weight of it was undeniable. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the train had already reached my destination, the station I needed to get off at. I glanced up at the digital sign, which flashed "Next stop, Central Station." That's where I needed to be. I gripped the pole tighter, preparing to step off when the doors opened. But when the train came to a complete stop and the doors slid open, I was left standing there in confusion. The platform outside was empty, eerily so. The usual rush of people, the distant noise of the city, was absent. It was just a wide, quiet space with nothing but shadows and dim lights. I peered outside, half expecting the train to pull away as the doors remained open for a few moments longer than usual. But there was something wrong. The train had stopped, yes, but the whole scene felt off. I didn't see anyone waiting to board. I couldn't even hear any noise coming from the outside. I stepped off the train, my heart already beating a little faster. I didn't know why, but I felt like I shouldn't be here. Not yet, not in this moment. It wasn't just the station that was silent, it was me, too. I tried to push the strange feeling away and looked for a sign of life, anything to reassure me. But the station was empty. No one was around. No one in sight. The lights flickered above, casting long shadows on the platform. I looked back at the train, its doors still wide open, the inside as still as the outside. The passengers I had seen earlier, the man with the phone, the woman with the headphones, the tired man in the suit, were nowhere to be found. The train wasn't empty, it was simply abandoned. There was no sound, no movement, no indication that anyone had been there at all. I took a few steps back, my unease growing with each passing second. It was as though the whole place had been suspended in time, frozen in place. A cold, tight feeling settled in my chest. I glanced at the sign again. Central Station. That's where I had gotten on. That's where I had intended to get off. But I was no longer sure. A deep, unsettling thought crept into my mind. Asterisk, had I ever really boarded this train? I turned around, scanning the now empty platform, trying to shake the feeling of dread that was growing in the pit of my stomach. The train's doors had closed by now, but it didn't move. It just sat there, silent, waiting. I wasn't sure what to do next. My stop was supposed to be here, but somehow it didn't feel right. I walked to the edge of the platform, trying to get a better sense of where I was. It wasn't my station. It didn't look familiar. The walls of the platform, the tiles, the signs above, none of them were the ones I'd passed by hundreds of times. There were no ads for the coffee shop I usually passed. The tile patterns were off, the signs in a different font. There were no billboards for the same local stores I had seen day after day. The faint sound of the train's distant hum was the only thing that anchored me to this reality, but even that sounded wrong. A dull, distant echo, like it was coming from far away. I walked to the platform's edge again, unsure of what to do. There was no one else here, no other passengers. I felt trapped in an unfamiliar space, as if the world had shifted around me. I turned back to the train once more, half expecting the doors to open again, but they didn't. They were locked now, closed, as if the train had never been there in the first place. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. I should have gotten off by now. I should have been at my stop. But now it felt like I was standing on the precipice of something I couldn't see, a place that didn't belong to me, and I had no idea how to get back. I turned and walked towards the stairs leading to the street above. The empty station felt colder with each step I took. There were no footsteps behind me, no signs of life. The silence enveloped me like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. As I reached the top of the stairs, the doors to the exit opened automatically. But outside was darker than I had ever seen it. The streetlights were dim, the road empty, and the city skyline, unfamiliar, altered. I stepped out onto the pavement, looking around in confusion. It was still night, but everything felt muted. Even the city's lights seemed dim, as if the world were wrapped in a haze. I looked back at the station entrance. The doors had closed, but I could see the reflection in the glass. I could see myself, standing there, staring back at me, and in the reflection, I wasn't alone. A figure stood behind me, just barely visible, almost like a shadow. I turned quickly, but there was no one there, only the empty, empty street. I've been searching for answers ever since, trying to make sense of what happened that night, but I've never been able to find the station again, no matter how many times I've ridden that same subway route. The train never stops at that station. It doesn't even exist. I still ride the subway every day, but every time the train reaches my stop, I hesitate. Just for a second. Always wondering, always remembering that night, because now I'm not sure if I was ever really there. It happened on a day that should have been like any other. I had just wrapped up a morning meeting, the kind that drags on and leaves you feeling drained and ready for a break. I walked out of the office building, squinting in the daylight, my thoughts already focused on what I needed to do next. The streets were bustling with people, as they always are in the city, everyone lost in their own little worlds. It was a normal Wednesday, a little dull, a little gray, but nothing unusual. I started walking down the sidewalk, heading in the direction of my usual coffee shop. It wasn't far from the office, just a short walk to clear my mind before getting back to work. I've made this walk hundreds of times. I could do it with my eyes closed, so I wasn't paying much attention to the details around me. The sounds of footsteps, the hum of conversations, the occasional car horn, all of it blended together into the familiar city noise. But then, something shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. She was standing at the corner of the street, just slightly off to the side, as if waiting for something or someone. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about her stopped me in my tracks. She was looking directly at me, and when our eyes met, there was an instant recognition. Not like I knew her, not like she was a familiar face. No, it was something deeper, more unsettling. It was as if she knew me, as if she knew exactly where I was headed and where I shouldn't be going. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear over the noise of the street. I paused, glancing at her again. She was wearing a dark green jacket, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. And she looked like she belonged in the crowd, but at the same time, she didn't. There was something strange about her presence, something that made my skin prickle. "You're going the wrong way," she added, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was trying to see past me into some deeper part of my mind. "You should turn around." I blinked, not sure how to respond. I didn't know her. I didn't even recognize her face. And yet, there was this undeniable pull, like I had been caught in some web of her words, something I couldn't quite grasp. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice catching. I took a step back, trying to keep my composure. "I'm just heading to the coffee shop." She didn't react to my response. Her gaze didn't shift. She just kept staring at me, almost like she was studying me. "Not today," she said. Her words were final, like a statement I had no room to argue with. And then, almost as quickly as she'd spoken, she turned away, walking briskly down the street without another glance. Her figure disappeared into the crowd of pedestrians, swallowed by the noise and movement of the city. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what had just happened. I should have brushed it off. I knew that. It was just some stranger making an odd comment, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the encounter wasn't normal. I shook my head, trying to push the feeling away, and continued walking. The coffee shop was just ahead, and I could almost smell the familiar aroma of espresso in the air. But as I walked toward it, I couldn't help but glance back down the street. The spot where she had been standing was now completely empty, and there was no sign of her. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just a strange encounter, a random moment that didn't need to be given any more thought. But as I reached the door to the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of hesitation. I pushed the door open, stepping inside. But as soon as I did, something hit me like a wave. The air inside the cafe was different. It was heavier, colder, and a sense of dread crawled up my spine. I looked around the room, my eyes searching for something familiar, but nothing seemed right? The people inside were all there, going about their business, but something was off. I couldn't place it at first, but it hit me with a jolt. The place felt wrong. The light was dimmer than usual, and the shadows in the corners seemed deeper. My feet felt heavy, and I found myself lingering near the door, hesitant to take another step. And that's when I saw her again. She was sitting at a table by the window, her eyes locked on mine. The same dark green jacket, the same ponytail, the same knowing expression. She was watching me, and this time there was no doubt in my mind. She knew something. She knew exactly what was going to happen. I froze, caught in her gaze, unable to look away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How was she here? She had disappeared moments ago. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? But before I could move, she smiled, the faintest curve of her lips. It wasn't a friendly smile, not really. It was more like a smirk, like she had some secret that I wasn't privy to. And then, without breaking eye contact, she raised a finger to her lips, as if to tell me to stay quiet, stay still. I turned away, too fast, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside the cafe felt even thicker now, oppressive, and I couldn't breathe. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there, away from her, away from whatever was happening. I didn't even order my coffee. I turned and stumbled out of the cafe, my legs unsteady, my mind racing. I had to get away. I had to clear my head. But as I stepped back onto the street, something caught my eye. Across the road, she was standing there again, as if waiting for me. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine, and the world around me seemed to distort. The buildings, the streetlights, the people, it all looked different now, like I was seeing them through a fog. But she, standing there at the corner, was as clear as day. This time, she didn't say anything. She just watched me, and I realized, with growing horror, that I was the one who was lost, not her. She had never been lost. I turned away, my feet moving of their own accord, and began to walk. But this time, I wasn't sure where I was going. I couldn't remember which direction I was headed. It was one of those evenings where the air felt thicker than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I had just finished a late meeting and was walking home through the quiet streets, my mind still caught in the thoughts of the day. The sidewalks were nearly empty, the usual bustle of the city receding with the falling night. The streetlights hummed quietly, casting long, golden stretches of light across the wet pavement, the faint glisten of rain still lingering from earlier. I had planned on catching the bus, but when I reached the bus stop, I saw that it hadn't arrived yet. The night felt too heavy for waiting, so I decided to walk instead. I hadn't gone far when I noticed a taxi, just one, pulling up to the curb beside me. It wasn't even a glance I had given it. I was lost in my own world, walking at my usual pace. But when I looked up, the taxi was there, idling, its light flickering softly in the dim light of the street. I paused for a moment, confused, my eyes scanning the road behind it. There was no one else around. The taxi didn't seem to be waiting for anyone else. It was just there. The driver rolled down the window, his face shadowed by the dim light inside the car. I didn't recognize him, but something about his demeanor made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite place why. He gave a nod, his voice just audible through the open window. "Need a ride?" he asked, the tone friendly but something cold in the way he spoke. I wasn't expecting this. I hadn't flagged him down, hadn't even looked in his direction. There were no other taxis around. I stared at him for a moment, wondering if I was imagining things. I couldn't remember seeing him pull up, couldn't remember hearing the sound of the engine. But there he was, the car right beside me, the driver's gaze fixed on me. "No, thanks," I replied, my voice uncertain. I wasn't one to get into random taxis, especially late at night when things felt just a little off. But as I turned to walk away, the driver spoke again. "You sure? You look like you've been walking a while. It's late. I'm happy to give you a ride. Just get in." His voice was calm, almost too calm, and there was something about the way he said it that made my skin prickle. I took a step back, more out of instinct than thought, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The city around me felt suddenly too quiet, too still. I hadn't noticed it until now, but there were no sounds from the street, no distant cars, no footsteps. Just the hum of the taxi's engine and the soft whoosh of the wind around us. It was as though the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The driver didn't move, just waited patiently. His eyes remained fixed on me, his expression unreadable, but not unfriendly. His hand rested on the steering wheel, still, steady. There was something about him that didn't quite match the city, didn't match the time of night. It felt wrong. I hesitated, my feet frozen in place. I could have walked away, kept going, but for some reason, I couldn't. My mind told me to keep walking, to get as far from this strange moment as possible, but my body felt heavy, like something was pulling me in, drawing me toward the car. The taxi was still there, waiting. The driver was still waiting, and there was no one else around. Before I could think it through, I found myself stepping toward the car, my legs moving against my will. The door clicked open as I reached it, and I climbed in without a word, the door shutting softly behind me. The interior was dim, illuminated only by the soft light of the dashboard. The driver didn't speak right away, and for a moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the engine and my own breathing. "Whereto?" the driver finally asked, his voice calm, almost too calm, as if he knew what I was going to say before I even said it. I hadn't given it much thought, but now that I was in the car, I realized I had no idea where I wanted to go. My usual stop, my apartment, felt too far away, somehow too distant. It felt wrong to say it. "I'm not sure," I muttered, feeling oddly detached from the situation, like it wasn't even real, just somewhere close. The driver nodded, and without asking for directions, he pulled out into the street. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the sound of the tires on the wet road the only noise. The city passed by in blurred flashes, the glowing streetlights, the dark outlines of buildings, the empty sidewalks. I felt the tension in the air, thickening with every turn. It wasn't the ride itself. The cab was clean, the seats comfortable. The driver was silent, his hands steady on the wheel. But something wasn't right. I kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, but he never looked back. His face shadowed, expression unreadable. And then I noticed something I couldn't quite explain. I had been watching the passing buildings, watching the lights flicker by, but now the streets looked different. They looked unfamiliar. I couldn't place it at first. The buildings, the intersections, nothing looked like the city I knew so well. The street signs were different, the colors strange, and the places I thought I recognized had all changed. I turned to the driver, my voice shaky. "Where are we going?" I asked, my breath suddenly coming too fast. He didn't respond, didn't even glance at me. But the car kept moving, turning down streets I didn't recognize, heading into areas I knew didn't exist in the city I lived in. The world outside the taxi felt like it was slipping into a different version of itself. A version that wasn't real. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling, but it wouldn't budge. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel, and he spoke for the first time since I'd gotten in. "You shouldn't have gotten in," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But now that you have, you can't leave." The words hit me like a punch, cold and sharp. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. Something old, something ancient, something that wasn't human. The car kept moving, heading deeper into the city I didn't recognize, into a place I didn't belong. I felt my heart race, the fear spreading through me like wildfire. I was trapped. No matter how hard I pulled at the door, no matter how much I tried to scream or yell for help, there was no sound. No one would hear me. The taxi stopped at a red light. The driver didn't move. The city around me blurred. I looked out the window once more, but now, the streets outside weren't just unfamiliar. They were empty, and the silence grew deeper. It started as an innocent detour. I was walking home from work, tired but eager to get back to my apartment. The streets were quiet, the kind of evening where the usual noise of the city felt muffled by the chill in the air. I had walked this route 1,000 times, my feet treading the same pavement, my mind lost in the familiarity of it all. But on that night, something felt different. There was an itch in the air, a sense of something just out of reach. I turned down a street I hadn't taken before, a narrow alley that seemed to beckon me, though I couldn't say why. It was darker here, the streetlights casting long shadows against the brick walls. The alley was lined with old buildings, their facades covered in layers of chipped paint and faded posters. As I walked deeper into the alley, I noticed a large, almost haunting piece of graffiti on the side of one of the walls. At first, it seemed like nothing, just another piece of urban art. But as I stepped closer, something about it made me stop. The painting was dark and sprawling, a swirl of chaotic lines, with strange symbols that didn't make sense at first glance. But it wasn't just the shapes or the colors that caught my attention. It was the feeling of it. The way it seemed to pulse, almost alive, like it was watching me. The longer I stood there, the more unsettled I felt. The graffiti was too detailed, too intricate to be just a random piece of street art. It almost felt intentional, as though it had been painted specifically for me. I leaned in, squinting at the symbols, trying to make sense of them, when I saw something that froze me in place. At the center of the artwork was a face. Not just any face, my face. But it wasn't a perfect replica. It was distorted, twisted in a way that was both familiar and strange. I could see my eyes, my mouth, but they were skewed, as if someone had taken my features and stretched them out of proportion. The face was framed by dark, swirling lines, like smoke or shadows, and it felt like it was staring directly at me. Seeing something I couldn't quite understand. I felt my heart skip a beat. This was too much. I had never seen this piece of graffiti before. Yet it felt like it had been there for longer than I could comprehend, waiting for me to find it. I took a step back, trying to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. But then, as I looked closer, I noticed something else. The graffiti wasn't just a face. Around the edges, hidden in the chaotic lines, were words that weren't immediately visible, but were there, waiting to be discovered. I couldn't read them at first. They were so faint, like they had been scratched into the surface, worn down over time. But as I focused harder, the words began to form. Asterisk, you're hiding, but I know what you're afraid of. I blinked, my stomach lurching. I took a step back, my hands trembling. No one was around. The alley was silent, the air still, but it felt like the walls were closing in. The words on the wall weren't just some random phrase. They were personal. They were mine. The things I had buried in my mind, the things I tried to forget, were staring back at me from that wall. The first thing that hit me was the fear. The fear of being seen, of having something that I had kept hidden for so long exposed to the world. The words continued, flickering into existence, as if they were written just for me. Asterisk, you can't run forever. I stepped closer again, my pulse racing. How could this be? How could someone have known these things about me? These were the kinds of fears, the anxieties, that I never shared with anyone. I had never said them aloud. But somehow, this graffiti, this strange twisted piece of art, knew them. I backed away again, trying to distance myself from the overwhelming feeling of being watched. I could hear the sound of my breath, shallow and quick, as I turned and began walking briskly out of the alley. But the words continued to haunt me. They felt like they were following me, crawling into my mind, repeating themselves. Asterisk, I know what you're hiding. I kept walking, faster now, the cold air biting at my skin, but the image of that face, my face, remained in my mind. The graffiti had been on that wall long before I found it. But how long had it been there, waiting for me to stumble across it? How had it known what I had buried deep inside me, things I couldn't even say to myself? By the time I reached the end of the alley and stepped back onto the main road, I was breathing heavily. I looked around, half expecting to see someone following me, someone who had seen me stop at the graffiti and now knew my deepest fears. But the street was empty, the lights flickering quietly as they always did. Still, the weight of the encounter lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I had walked away, but the graffiti hadn't. It was still there, painted on that wall, watching, knowing. And as I made my way home, the words echoed in my head, over and over. Again, asterisk, you can't hide forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, distorted and twisted, staring back at me from the wall. I tried to shake it off, but it felt like something had taken root inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop wondering how it knew. Who had painted it? How had they known? The next morning, I went back to the alley, hoping it was all just some weird dream, some trick of the mind. But when I reached the spot, my heart sank. The wall was empty. There was no graffiti, no face, no words. The wall was blank, just like any other wall. I stood there for a long moment, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Had it all been some strange hallucination? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew that what I had seen, what I had read had been real. And whatever had painted that graffiti, whatever had known me so deeply, was still out there somewhere, waiting for the next person to find it, waiting for the next person to see what they were hiding. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that makes you feel like the world is just a little too still. I had been walking through the park, lost in my thoughts. The trees around me casting long shadows as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the earthy smell of the damp soil, and the occasional chirp of birds created a kind of peaceful harmony. It was the kind of peace that made you forget the rush of the city, the deadlines, the noise. Just nature. Just silence, just the hum of the world going by. I was heading towards my favorite bench near the pond, the one shaded by a large oak tree. It was usually empty, a spot I often retreated to when I needed a break from the world. As I walked closer, I noticed someone sitting on the bench, a woman in a long coat, her back to me. Her posture was straight, her shoulders squared, but there was something odd about the way she sat, something unnerving in the stillness of her form. I slowed my pace as I neared, not wanting to disturb her, but there was something about the way she was positioned that caught my attention. She wasn't just sitting, she was frozen, her hands resting on her lap, her head slightly tilted down, as if she were staring at something in her hands. I couldn't help but glance at her. As I walked past, she seemed out of place. Somehow, her presence too, still in the midst of the busy park. I was about to keep walking when I heard her voice. "Don't keep walking," she said, her tones soft but clear. I froze. The sound of her voice was unmistakable. But when I turned back to look at her, her mouth didn't move, not even a twitch. Her lips were perfectly still, the edges unmoving, as if frozen in place, but the words were there, undeniably real, as if they had been spoken directly into my mind. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I stared at her, my mind racing, wondering if I was imagining things. Maybe I had misheard her. Maybe it was just the wind. But there was no wind. Her gaze, although fixed forward, seemed to hold a quiet intensity. Her eyes, pale and unfocused, didn't blink or shift. It was as if she was waiting for something from me. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the ground, and for a moment I considered just walking away, pretending. I hadn't heard anything. But the voice came again, this time more insistent, though still without her mouth moving. "Don't leave yet. You haven't seen it." I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what she meant by it, but the way she spoke, with such certainty, made me feel like I had no choice but to listen. Something about her, the way she was sitting, the way she didn't move, was pulling me in. I hesitated, then slowly took a step towards her, my legs feeling heavy, as though I were walking through water. The park around me was suddenly too quiet, the air too thick. The only sound was my own breathing, shallow and quick, and the gentle rustle of the leaves in the trees. As I neared the bench, I felt a strange pull, like I was tethered to her. I couldn't explain it, but something about her was drawing me in. I wanted to speak, to ask her why she was speaking without moving, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the bench, a few feet away from her, my eyes still locked on her unmoving form. "You can't see it, can you?" she said again, her voice now tinged with a faint sadness. I didn't answer. How could I? I had no idea what she was talking about. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to notice, though her body remained perfectly still. There was something disorienting about the way she moved, or rather, the way she didn't. Her eyes shifted, focusing directly on me, and I felt like I was being drawn into them, pulled into the depths of her gaze. "You're afraid," she said. It wasn't a question, just a simple observation, but it struck me in a way I couldn't explain. I was afraid. I didn't know why, but the words felt too true. Her head tilted slightly to the side, and then she spoke again, her voice like a whisper against the growing silence around us. "Look around you." The words were clear, but they held an eerie weight to them, as if the park itself were waiting for me to see something. Something hidden, something I had missed all this time. I slowly turned my head, looking around the park. The familiar path, the pond, the benches, everything looked the same, and yet everything felt off. There was a strange stillness in the air, like the park was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice something. And then, I saw it. At first, it was subtle, a shadow flickering by the edge of the trees, just at the corner of my vision. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing. I looked back at the bench, at the woman, but she was still staring ahead, her eyes locked onto something I couldn't see. I blinked, and when I looked back around me, I saw it more clearly. The shadows weren't shadows at all, they were figures. Faint, translucent shapes that appeared to be moving, shifting, just outside the edge of my vision. They weren't fully formed, more like distortions in the air, flickering like static on a broken TV screen. I could hear a low hum in the air now, faint but persistent, like the sound of 1,000 whispers. It was coming from the shadows, from the figures I hadn't noticed before. They were circling, watching, waiting. I turned back to the woman, but she hadn't moved. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, as if nothing had changed. "You see them now," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "They were always here. They've been waiting for you." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't even know what to think. The figures, the shadows, the voices, they were all too much, too overwhelming. But the woman remained still, her presence as constant as the park around us, her eyes never leaving mine. It was as if she had always known, always seen what I had missed, what I had been blind to. "They come for those who don't see them," she said quietly, her voice barely audible now. "And they never leave." I stood up abruptly, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't stay there, not with those figures moving around me, not with the park feeling so wrong, so unnatural. I turned to leave, but as I walked away, the woman's voice called out one last time, "You'll be back." I quickened my pace, my feet stumbling as I rushed down the path. The shadows seemed to follow me, moving just out of sight, as if they were lingering, waiting for me to look again, to acknowledge them once more. And even though I didn't turn back, even though I didn't look, I could feel them. I could feel them watching. It was late, much later than I'd expected. The sky was a heavy shade of indigo, the kind that seemed to swallow the stars and make the city feel smaller, darker. I had been out all day, running errands, catching up with work. By the time I decided to head home, I felt the familiar tug of fatigue, the dull ache in my legs, the heaviness of exhaustion creeping in. The subway ride was quiet, the usual hum of the train almost comforting, but as soon as I stepped off, I realized something was wrong. I reached for my phone to check the map, just to make sure I was headed in the right direction. My usual route home wasn't complicated, just a few blocks and I'd be back in the safety of my apartment. But as I opened the app and stared at the screen, something caught my eye. The map didn't look right. The streets I was familiar with, the ones I had walked down 100 times, weren't there. In their place, there was an unfamiliar grid, a maze of roads and alleys I didn't recognize. I zoomed in, my thumb nervously tapping on the screen, trying to refresh the app. But the map stayed the same. A place I didn't know, a place that wasn't even on my mental map of the city. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. I was familiar with every street, every intersection around here. I knew this city like the back of my hand. I had lived here for years. How could the map be showing something different? The phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me out of my confusion. A notification popped up. New location. Map update. I shook my head, feeling a sudden unease crawl up my spine. There was no way this was an update. This wasn't some new part of the city. I had walked every inch of it. I looked around, feeling the faintest pull toward something I couldn't explain. The streets around me were dimly lit, the familiar storefronts and street lamps casting long shadows across the pavement. The hum of distant traffic was the only sound that seemed to exist in the space between me and whatever this was. I tried to follow the route the map suggested, just to see if it led me back to the streets I knew. But with each step, the city around me felt increasingly unfamiliar. The buildings seemed older, their facades cracked and peeling, as if they had been here far longer than I'd known. The street signs were in a language I didn't recognize, the words unfamiliar, the letters strange. The map on my phone, however, didn't change. It stayed locked on the route that led me deeper into this unknown part of the city. My curiosity, at first, had made me feel brave, but now there was a sense of growing dread, like I was stepping into a place that wasn't meant for me, a place that existed outside of time, outside of reason. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing off the walls of the deserted streets. The further I went, the more the world around me seemed to distort. The familiar sounds of the city, the car horns, the chatter of people, the hum of everyday life were gone. There was only the silence now, thick and heavy, pressing down on me. I glanced up and saw the shapes of buildings towering around me, their windows dark, their doors shut tight, as if they had been abandoned long ago. I glanced at my phone again. The map was still guiding me down a narrow, winding street. I was close. It felt like I was closing in on something, though I had no idea what. There was a certain pull, a strange connection that made me feel like I had to follow the map, as if it were my only way forward. The street eventually opened up into a square, an eerie kind of silence settling around it. In the center, there was a fountain, its water still and unmoving, like it had been frozen in time. The fountain was surrounded by old stone benches. their surfaces worn and cracked, as though no one had sat there in years. I walked closer to the fountain, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the place the map had led me to, but it didn't make sense. The fountain wasn't marked on any map I had ever seen, and yet, it was real. I was standing right in front of it, feeling the weight of it in my bones, the unnerving reality of this strange place seeping into my skin. I looked around, searching for any clue that would make this make sense, but there was nothing. No one in sight, no shops, no vehicles, no sign of life. The buildings around the square were empty, their windows staring at me like hollow eyes. Then I noticed something, a small door to the side of the square, half hidden in the shadow of a building. It was different from the rest of the city, old and weathered, as though it had been forgotten by time. My phone buzzed again, pulling my attention back to the screen. The map had updated, and the new location pointed directly at that door. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. It felt like the map was urging me forward, pushing me toward this door, as if it had been waiting for me to find it all along. My fingers felt cold as I reached for the door handle, my mind racing with 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. The door creaked open slowly, and I stepped inside. The interior was dark, the walls lined with shelves that stretched high above me, filled with books and old objects that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of dust and aged paper. I stood there for a moment, my senses heightened, trying to make sense of what was happening. The atmosphere felt too thick, too real, but at the same time, too unreal to fully comprehend. The door behind me slammed shut, and I spun around, my heart racing in my chest. There was no sound, no movement, only the stillness. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and looked back at my phone. The map had updated again, but this time there was no location, only a message. Asterisk, you're here, but you were never meant to be. Asterisk, a cold chill ran down my spine. The room seemed to close in around me, the shelves stretching taller, the shadows deepening. I turned to the door, but it was gone. In its place was a solid wall, smooth and featureless. The map was gone too, and now there was no way out. The city outside was a memory, a place that no longer existed. And the map, the one that had guided me here, had led me into a place that I couldn't escape. I was standing there, in the room, in the place that didn't exist, and I had no idea how to get back.